Get her on the ground now. The command cut through the afternoon air so sharply that every conversation at the gas station stopped at once. A mother carrying a fountain drink froze beside the entrance. A truck driver lowered his sunglasses. Even the hum of the fuel pumps seemed to fade beneath the tension spreading across the concrete. In the center of it all stood Angela Brooks, a 52-year-old black woman wearing a simple gray jacket, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. She wasn't running. She wasn't arguing. She simply stood beside pump number 7 with both hands visible, her expression calm despite the growing crowd around her. Across the parking lot, 3 police cruisers sat with their emergency lights flashing blue and red across the polished windows of nearby vehicles. Officer Ryan Keller stepped forward, his jaw tight, one hand resting near his radio. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order." Angela slowly nodded. "Officer, I'm cooperating." Her voice remained steady, the kind of steady that comes from years of experience handling difficult situations, the kind that somehow made the tension feel even heavier. Several people had already pulled out their phones. Tiny screens pointed toward Angela from every direction. A teenager near the ice machine whispered, "What did she do?" Nobody seemed to know. Nobody seemed to care. The cameras kept recording anyway. The afternoon sun hung low above the Arizona horizon, casting long shadows across the station. Heat shimmered above the asphalt despite the approaching evening. Angela glanced briefly toward an older man sitting alone on a bench near the side of the building. His weathered military cap rested on his knees. His shoulders were hunched against the dry desert wind. He looked worried, not for himself, but for her. "Stay seated, Walter," Angela called gently. "Everything's going to be all right." The elderly veteran gave a small nod, but said nothing. Officer Keller frowned. "Ma'am, focus on me." Angela returned her attention to him. "I am focused on you, officer." The answer somehow irritated him more. Behind Keller, Sergeant Tom Whitmore stepped from his cruiser while speaking rapidly into a radio. More officers were arriving. More flashing lights reflected across the gas station windows. The crowd continued growing. Some customers abandoned their pumps entirely just to watch. One woman began live streaming. Thousands of viewers would soon be watching an event that none of them understood. Angela's phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket. Once, twice, then again. She ignored it. The calls kept coming. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. Area code. Again and again. She never reached for it. Her eyes remained on the officers standing before her. Keller noticed the vibrations. "You expecting somebody important?" he asked sarcastically. Angela looked down briefly before meeting his gaze. "No, officer." The phone vibrated again, this time longer, more insistent. Somewhere nearly 2,000 miles away, inside a secure operations center surrounded by screens, maps, and uniformed personnel, someone was attempting to reach Angela Brooks for the 4th time in less than 3 minutes. Back at the gas station, nobody knew that. Nobody knew why the calls were being made. Nobody knew what would happen if they were ignored much longer. They only saw a middle-aged black woman standing quietly in a parking lot surrounded by police officers. Officer Keller took another step forward. The crowd leaned closer. The cameras remained fixed on Angela. Her phone vibrated once more. Then Sergeant Whitmore's radio suddenly crackled with a message that made the color drain from his face. 30 minutes earlier, the gas station had been quiet enough to hear the distant rumble of trucks crossing Interstate 10. The desert sky stretched endlessly above the Arizona landscape, painted in pale blue and washed with afternoon sunlight. Angela Brooks eased her dark blue SUV beside pump number 7 and turned off the engine. For a moment, she simply sat there, enjoying the silence. She had spent nearly 4 hours on the road and still had another 90 miles before reaching Phoenix. A handwritten address rested on the passenger seat beside a small paper gift bag. Inside the bag was a neatly folded blanket, a new pair of gloves, and several photographs from decades ago. Angela stepped out of the vehicle and adjusted her jacket against the dry wind. She was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about a man she had spent almost 6 months searching for. A retired veteran. A forgotten hero. Someone most of the country no longer remembered. She had finally received a tip placing him near this stretch of highway. As she finished fueling the vehicle, movement near the edge of the parking lot caught her attention. An elderly man sat alone on a weathered bench beside a faded vending machine. His clothes were clean but worn. His boots showed years of use. Resting carefully beside him was an old military duffel bag that looked older than some of the cars in the parking lot. Angela noticed the cap first. United States Army. Faded lettering. Unit patch nearly worn away by time. The man stared toward the mountains without speaking. Customers walked past him without making eye contact. Angela quietly picked up 2 bottles of water from inside the station along with a sandwich and a cup of coffee. She approached slowly. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up. Deep lines framed his face. His eyes carried the distant look of someone who had seen too much and spoken about it too little. "You dropped something?" he asked politely. Angela smiled. "No, sir. But it looks like you skipped lunch." The veteran glanced at the food and immediately shook his head. "I cannot take that." "You can," Angela replied. "Because I already bought it." A faint smile appeared beneath his gray mustache. "Then thank you." They sat together beneath the shade of a metal awning while traffic rolled past in the distance. The veteran introduced himself as Walter Reed. Angela nearly dropped her coffee. Not because the name was famous, because she recognized it instantly from stories she had heard for more than 25 years. Stories told by her husband late at night after military ceremonies and reunions. Stories about courage, sacrifice, loyalty. Walter Reed had once served in the same combat unit as a young officer named Marcus Brooks. Angela carefully studied the man's face. Older now, thinner, but unmistakable. Her heart tightened. "Walter," she asked softly, "did you ever serve overseas in Operation Desert Shield?" The veteran looked surprised. "That was a long time ago." Angela nodded slowly. "I know." Walter stared at her for several seconds. "How do you know about that?" Angela was about to answer when a police cruiser turned into the station and slowed near her vehicle. Then a second cruiser appeared behind it. Moments later, a third followed. The arrival of 3 police cruisers transformed the atmosphere of the gas station almost instantly. Conversations faded. Customers looked up from their pumps. A cashier inside the convenience store paused while stocking a shelf near the front window. Officer Ryan Keller stepped out first, adjusting his duty belt as he scanned the parking lot. His eyes settled almost immediately on Angela's SUV. The vehicle matched a description that had been broadcast less than 20 minutes earlier. Dark blue. Government registration. Last seen traveling westbound along Interstate 10. Keller walked slowly around the SUV while another officer examined the license plate. Angela remained seated beside Walter beneath the awning, unaware that the situation unfolding across the parking lot was moving in a direction neither of them expected. Walter noticed the officers first. He lowered his coffee cup and frowned. "Something tells me they are not here for gas." Angela followed his gaze. "Probably just checking on something." She smiled politely, but a small knot formed in her stomach. Officer Keller stopped beside the driver's door of the SUV and spoke into his radio. The response came quickly. His expression changed. The officer beside him glanced toward Angela. Then both men began walking directly toward the bench. The crunch of gravel beneath their boots seemed unusually loud. "Afternoon," Keller said. His tone was professional but noticeably firm. Angela stood. "Good afternoon, officer." "Is that your vehicle?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Can I see your identification?" Angela nodded immediately and reached for her purse. She handed over her driver's license without hesitation. Keller studied it for several seconds. "Angela Brooks." "That is correct." The officer looked from the license to the SUV and back again. "Where are you headed today, Mrs. Brooks?" "Phoenix." "Purpose of travel?" "Personal business." Keller's eyes narrowed slightly. The answer seemed to bother him. "Can you be more specific?" Angela glanced at Walter before responding. "I am meeting someone." Keller looked toward the veteran. "Him. I just met him 30 minutes ago," Angela replied honestly. Walter shifted uncomfortably on the bench. The second officer had already begun taking photographs of the SUV and checking information on a tablet. Customers nearby openly watched the conversation now. Angela could feel their eyes on her. "Mrs. Brooks," Keller said, "this vehicle is showing up under a federal registration record." "That is correct." "Can you explain why?" Angela maintained her calm. "Because it is authorized." Keller folded his arms. "Authorized by whom?" For the first time, Angela hesitated. Not because she was hiding anything. Because she had spent most of her adult life avoiding conversations about status, rank, or influence. She preferred being treated like everyone else. "Officer," she said carefully, I assure you there is nothing improper about that vehicle. Keller did not seem satisfied. That was not my question. The wind swept across the parking lot, rattling a loose advertisement banner near the station entrance. Angela's phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket, then vibrated again. She ignored it. Keller noticed. You seem popular today. Angela offered a polite smile. Apparently. The second officer suddenly approached carrying the tablet. He whispered something into Keller's ear. Whatever he said caused Keller's expression to harden. Nearby customers exchanged curious looks. Walter sat forward on the bench, concern growing across his face. Keller looked directly at Angela. Mrs. Brooks, I need you to answer a few more questions. Angela could feel the situation shifting beneath the surface, like storm clouds gathering beyond a clear horizon. And judging by the look in Keller's eyes, the next few minutes were about to become far more complicated. Angela could sense that the conversation was no longer about a routine vehicle check. Something had changed. Officer Keller glanced once more at the tablet before looking directly at her. Mrs. Brooks, according to the information we received, there are inconsistencies connected to this registration. Angela remained calm. Then there has been a misunderstanding. Maybe, Keller replied. That is what we are trying to determine. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. A delivery driver leaned against his truck. Several customers stood near the gas pumps pretending to fuel their vehicles while watching every word. Walter shifted uneasily on the bench. Officer, the elderly veteran said, this lady has been helping me all afternoon. Keller barely glanced in his direction. Sir, please remain seated. The dismissal did not go unnoticed by Angela. She looked toward Walter and offered a reassuring smile before turning back to the officers. What exactly is the issue? She asked. The second officer spoke for the first time. The vehicle registration is connected to a restricted federal database. Angela nodded. That is not surprising. Keller raised an eyebrow. You seem very comfortable with that answer. Because there is nothing unusual about it. The officer folded his arms tighter. Most people do not drive vehicles connected to restricted federal records. Angela considered her words carefully. For years, she had avoided using her husband's position to solve problems. Marcus had always believed respect should be earned, not demanded. She believed the same thing. Officer Keller, she said calmly, reading the name on his badge. If there is concern about the registration, I would be happy to provide a contact number for verification. Keller's expression hardened. Verification from whom? Angela reached slowly into her purse and removed a business card. The thick white card carried only a name and a secure government number. Keller examined it briefly. The moment his eyes landed on the number, something flickered across his face. Suspicion, disbelief, perhaps even irritation. You expect me to call this? Angela answered honestly. If your goal is to verify the vehicle, yes. Keller handed the card back without dialing. That is not how this works. Angela felt the knot in her stomach tighten. Then how does it work? The officer did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked again toward the SUV. How long have you had access to that vehicle? Several years. And who authorized it? Angela took a slow breath. Officer, I have answered every question you have asked. The wind carried dust across the edge of the parking lot. Somewhere nearby, a truck horn echoed from the highway. Angela's phone vibrated again. Then again. 5 calls now. 6. She still ignored them. Walter watched her with growing concern. You should probably answer that, he said quietly. Angela glanced at the screen, but shook her head. Not yet. Keller noticed. Important call? Perhaps. From Washington? Angela did not respond. That silence seemed to confirm something in his mind. Nearby, another police vehicle entered the station and parked beside the others. More flashing lights reflected across the convenience store windows. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. Then Keller spoke the words that caused several people in the crowd to stop whispering altogether. Mrs. Brooks, until we sort this out, I need you to stay right here. Angela looked directly into his eyes. Officer, I have not attempted to leave. Good, Keller replied. Because this situation is becoming a lot more serious than you think. The temperature seemed to rise with every passing minute. What had started as a simple stop along the highway now felt like the center of an unfolding spectacle. More people gathered near the storefront windows. Several customers openly recorded with their phones. Angela could hear fragments of whispered conversations floating through the dry Arizona air. Nobody knew the full story, but everyone seemed eager to invent one. Officer Keller stepped aside briefly to speak with Sergeant Whitmore. Their voices remained low, but their expressions revealed growing concern. The information coming through their radios was not providing the clarity they expected. Instead, every answer appeared to generate new questions. Angela remained where she was, calm, patient. She had spent decades attending military ceremonies, charity events, veterans programs, and public functions. She understood how quickly assumptions could spread once a crowd decided on a narrative. Walter watched her carefully from the bench. "You are handling this better than most people would," he said quietly. Angela smiled. Getting upset rarely helps anyone think clearly. Walter looked toward the officers. They seem convinced something is wrong. "Sometimes people become attached to first impressions," Angela replied, "even when the facts say otherwise." Her phone vibrated again. Then again. The screen briefly illuminated through the fabric of her jacket. "Washington, D.C." Angela exhaled slowly. She knew Marcus would be concerned if messages were not being returned. Still, she did not reach for the device. She wanted the situation resolved through normal procedures. Nothing more. Across the parking lot, Sergeant Whitmore suddenly approached carrying a printed document. He handed it to Keller, who scanned it rapidly. The officer's jaw tightened. He turned and walked directly toward Angela once again. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "we have attempted to verify several details connected to this vehicle." "And?" Angela asked. "The responses have been unusual." "Unusual does not mean incorrect." Keller paused. "No, but it does mean incomplete." Several spectators moved closer, pretending not to listen. Angela could feel the attention focused entirely on her. She remained composed. "Officer, I provided a direct verification contact." "Which nobody answered," Keller replied. That statement surprised her. Very few government offices ignored priority calls connected to that number, unless something larger was happening behind the scenes. Walter slowly stood from the bench. "This woman bought me lunch when nobody else would even look at me," he said. "Maybe that ought to count for something." Keller softened slightly toward the elderly veteran. "Sir, nobody is questioning her kindness. Feels like somebody is questioning a lot more than that." The words lingered in the air. For a moment, nobody spoke. Wind rattled the small American flag hanging near the convenience store entrance. The fabric snapped gently against the metal pole. Angela followed the sound with her eyes. The sight reminded her of hundreds of military bases, ceremonies, and homecomings she had attended through the years. Service, sacrifice, duty, values that never depended on rank. Behind Keller, a police radio crackled sharply. The officer attached to it immediately looked up. "Sergeant," he called, "you need to hear this." Whitmore took the radio. His expression changed almost instantly. Confusion first, then surprise, then something closer to disbelief. Keller noticed it too. "What is it?" he asked. The sergeant lowered the radio slowly and stared toward Angela. Before he could answer, every phone in the command vehicle parked near the pumps began ringing at exactly the same time. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The ringing phone seemed louder than the traffic on the interstate, louder than the wind crossing the desert, louder than the whispers that had filled the gas station all afternoon. Sergeant Whitmore stared toward the command vehicle as if he was trying to convince himself he had heard correctly. One officer answered a call, then another, then a third. Each conversation lasted only moments, yet every face seemed to change in exactly the same way. Confidence gave way to uncertainty. Uncertainty gave way to concern. Angela noticed it immediately. She also noticed something else. Walter was shivering. The afternoon heat had begun fading with the approaching evening, and the temperature drop was hitting the elderly veteran harder than he wanted to admit. Without saying a word, Angela removed the folded blanket from the gift bag resting near her feet. It was the same blanket she had planned to give him later. She stepped over and gently draped it across his shoulders. Walter looked up in surprise. "You do not have to do that." Angela smiled softly. "I think I do." The old veteran lowered his eyes. For a moment, emotion threatened to break through the calm dignity he had maintained all day. "Most people do not even stop to talk." "Then they are missing out," Angela replied. Around them, the atmosphere remained tense, but Angela seemed untouched by it. She sat beside Walter on the bench as though the crowd, the police vehicles, and the flashing lights no longer existed. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the parking lot. The American flag near the convenience store fluttered steadily against the darkening sky. Walter studied Angela carefully. "You knew who I was, did not you?" Angela nodded. "I recognized the unit patch on your cap." The veteran laughed quietly. "Most people would not know what that means. My husband talks about your unit often." Walter frowned. "Your husband served?" Angela looked toward the horizon. A distant memory softened her expression. For a very long time. Before Walter could ask another question, Sergeant Whitmore slowly approached. The confidence that had defined his posture earlier seemed noticeably diminished. He stopped several feet away and looked at Angela. Then he looked at the blanket around Walter's shoulders. Then he looked away again. "Mrs. Brooks," he said carefully, "is there anything you need right now?" Several nearby officers glanced toward him in surprise. The change in tone was impossible to miss. Angela considered the question for a moment. Then she pointed toward Walter. "Actually, yes." Whitmore straightened. "What is it?" Angela's voice remained gentle. "Could someone bring him a hot meal before the restaurants close?" Silence followed. Not because the request was difficult, because it was the last thing anyone expected her to ask. After everything that had happened, after hours of questions and suspicion, Angela's concern remained focused on someone else. Walter lowered his head, embarrassed. Whitmore stood motionless for a moment before quietly nodding. "Yes, ma'am." As he turned away, his radio crackled again. This time, everyone nearby heard the words clearly. "Pentagon liaison requesting immediate update. Priority 1. The entire parking lot seemed to stop breathing. The words hit the parking lot like a sudden change in weather. "Pentagon liaison requesting immediate update. Priority 1. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The radio transmission hung in the air while every officer processed what they had just heard. Sergeant Whitmore slowly lifted the radio toward his mouth, then lowered it again. Even he seemed unsure how to respond. Officer Keller stood completely still. The confidence that had carried him through the afternoon was gone now. In its place was a growing realization that this situation had expanded far beyond a routine investigation. The crowd sensed it too. Conversations stopped. Phones remained raised, but the excitement had been replaced by curiosity. People wanted answers. Across the parking lot, a black government sedan rolled quietly into the station and parked near the command vehicle. Its arrival was so smooth that many people barely noticed at first. Two men stepped out wearing dark suits and identification badges clipped to their jackets. They moved with the calm efficiency of people accustomed to serious responsibilities. Neither man looked at the crowd. Neither seemed interested in the officers surrounding the scene. Their attention went directly to Angela Brooks. Walter noticed first. "Those men know you," he said softly. Angela looked up and immediately recognized them. Her expression did not change. One of the men approached Sergeant Whitmore and presented official credentials. The sergeant examined them for only a moment before his posture straightened noticeably. The second man stepped forward. "We need to speak with Mrs. Brooks." Officer Keller exchanged a glance with Whitmore. "Who exactly are you?" The suited man handed over another identification card. Keller's eyes moved across the document. The color slowly drained from his face. He read it a second time, then a third. Around them, the desert wind carried a faint scent of dust and gasoline through the cooling evening air. Angela remained seated beside Walter, calm, unhurried, as though none of this surprised her. The suited official finally turned toward her. "Mrs. Brooks, we have been trying to reach you for nearly 20 minutes. Angela smiled apologetically. "I was occupied." The man almost laughed before catching himself. "Yes, ma'am. We noticed." Several officers exchanged confused looks. The official continued. "General Brooks has been informed of the situation." At the mention of the name, Walter suddenly froze. His eyes widened. "Marcus Brooks?" he whispered. Angela turned toward him. "You remember him?" Walter let out a quiet breath. "Remember him? I spent 2 years serving beside him." The realization struck him like a distant memory, finally returning home. He stared at Angela. Then everything clicked into place. The stories, the familiarity, the way she had recognized his unit patch. "You are his wife." Angela nodded gently. Nearby, Officer Keller looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The suited official faced the officers. "For clarification, Mrs. Angela Brooks is the spouse of General Marcus Brooks, chairman of the Joint Strategic Command, and a 4-star officer with active federal security protocols attached to his immediate family." Complete silence followed. Even the crowd seemed unable to react. Then Walter slowly stood from the bench, the blanket still draped across his shoulders. His voice trembled with emotion. "After all these years," he said quietly, "Marcus never forgot me, did he?" Angela's eyes softened. "No, Walter. He never did." The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation that had filled the parking lot earlier. Nobody seemed quite sure what to do next. The flashing lights still reflected across the gas station windows. The crowd still stood watching. Yet the entire atmosphere had changed. Sergeant Whitmore removed his cap and ran a hand across his forehead. Officer Keller stared at the pavement for several seconds before finally looking toward Angela. For the first time all afternoon, there was no suspicion in his eyes. Only reflection. Only the uncomfortable realization that assumptions had carried the situation much further than facts. The two officials from Washington stepped aside to handle a series of calls. Their voices remained low and professional. Angela paid little attention to them. Her focus remained entirely on Walter. The elderly veteran still looked stunned. "Marcus really sent you to find me?" he asked quietly. Angela smiled. "Not exactly." Walter looked confused. Angela reached into the paper gift bag and carefully removed a worn photograph protected inside a clear sleeve. She handed it to him. Walter's hands trembled as he accepted it. The photograph showed a group of young soldiers standing in desert camouflage beneath a blazing sun decades earlier. Near the center stood a much younger Marcus Brooks. Beside him stood Walter. Both were smiling. Both looked like men who believed they had their entire lives ahead of them. Walter stared at the image for a long moment. "I have not seen this picture in 30 years. Marcus keeps it in his office," Angela said softly. The veteran swallowed hard. Around them, several officers quietly lowered their eyes. The photograph somehow carried more weight than any government credential ever could. Walter continued staring at the picture. "Why did you come all this way?" Angela looked toward the mountains glowing orange beneath the setting sun. "Because Marcus finally learned where you might be." Walter blinked. "After all these years?" "After all these years." Emotion filled the veteran's face. "I thought everyone forgot." Angela shook her head immediately. "Not everyone." A restaurant employee emerged from the convenience store carrying a hot meal packed inside a takeout container. He approached Walter carefully and handed it to him. "This is for you, sir." Walter looked surprised. The young man pointed towards Sergeant Whitmore. He insisted. The veteran accepted the meal with both hands. "Thank you." Whitmore nodded quietly. "You are welcome." Another long silence settled across the parking lot. Not awkward, not tense, just thoughtful. Officer Keller finally stepped forward. His voice sounded different now. Softer, more human. "Mrs. Brooks." Angela turned toward him. "Yes, officer." Keller hesitated. The crowd remained completely silent. "I owe you an apology." Angela studied him for a moment. The officer seemed sincere. Not because of Marcus Brooks. Not because of Washington. Because something inside him genuinely understood what had happened. Angela smiled gently. "Then let us both learn something from today." Keller looked surprised. "That is all. That is enough." The officer nodded slowly. The answer seemed to affect him more than any punishment could have. Nearby, Walter carefully folded the photograph against his chest. His eyes glistened beneath the fading evening light. "You know," he said quietly, looking toward Angela, "Marcus was always lucky." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Lucky?" Walter smiled. "He married the right person." Darkness settled slowly over the desert as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. One by one, customers returned to their cars. The crowd that had gathered all afternoon began to dissolve into the evening. Phones were lowered. Conversations faded. The excitement was gone. What remained was something quieter, something heavier. The flashing lights from the police vehicles no longer felt important. Neither did the government sedan parked near the pumps. The center of the story had shifted somewhere else entirely. Walter sat on the bench with the warm meal beside him and the old photograph resting carefully in his hands. He looked at it again and again, as though each glance returned a piece of his life that he thought had been lost forever. Angela sat beside him in comfortable silence. No speeches, no celebration, no attention-seeking. Just two people sharing a moment that neither of them had expected when the day began. Across the parking lot, Officer Keller stood near his cruiser. He watched them quietly. The evening wind moved through the station, carrying the scent of desert earth cooling after a long day beneath the sun. Keller looked toward the American flag hanging above the convenience store entrance. It moved gently against the darkening sky. Earlier that afternoon, he had seen only a suspicious situation. Now he saw something completely different. He saw a woman who never raised her voice. A woman who never demanded special treatment. A woman who had spent hours worrying more about a forgotten veteran than about herself. The realization stayed with him. Nearby, Sergeant Whitmore finished speaking with the officials from Washington. Whatever reports needed filing could wait until later. Some lessons did not belong in paperwork. They belonged in memory. Walter finally broke the silence. "Tell Marcus I still owe him a cup of coffee." Angela laughed softly. "I think he would like that. And tell him I kept my promise." Angela looked at him. "What promise?" Walter smiled at the photograph. "That no matter what happened after we came home, I would keep moving forward." His voice grew quieter. Some days were harder than others. Angela nodded. She understood. The old soldier folded the photograph carefully and placed it inside his duffel bag. This time he did not treat it like a memory. He treated it like something waiting for tomorrow. A few minutes later, Angela stood and picked up the empty gift bag. Walter rose beside her. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then the veteran straightened his shoulders and offered the kind of respectful nod that only soldiers seem to understand. Angela returned it with a smile. The government sedan waited nearby. So did the road ahead. As she walked toward her vehicle, the desert wind lifted the edge of the blanket resting across Walter's shoulders. The flag above the station continued to wave softly in the darkness. Behind her, the officers remained still. Ahead of her, the highway stretched beneath the stars. No one applauded. No one announced a victory. There was only the sound of the wind, the distant hum of traffic, and an old veteran standing a little taller than he had that morning. And in the quiet that followed, justice needed no words at all.